Today we have a very exciting panel with 3 speakers. Before we invite all the speakers to come onto the stage, I would like to flip through some slides. This is a picture taken in 1959, which is arguably the first mobile phone, because we have the automobile and also the public phone. This is a picture taken in 1963, which considerably the first VR by that time. Humans have been really working on technology and trying really hard to catch up. In 1968, Toshiba invented this first picture phone. It didn't really go well. It wasn't popular. Until 1995, The Simpsons are still kind of imagining what video phone would be like. But time flies again. In 20 years of time, what we really experienced in the 1980s, everything became obsolete. On the left-hand side, all these devices are combined within, in our pocket right now. I used to go to library and go to these cabinets and search for books, and now it's becoming a prehistoric Googling. In the art field, when I was a student, I used to learn Andy Warhol's Brillo box was the found object. And in 2016, this is really amazing. A student in San Francisco put a pair of glasses in a museum. Suddenly, this picture went viral. And then everybody is like thinking about whether this pair of glasses is a found object and is it art. This is a picture that I just downloaded yesterday on Google, which is what we have right now in 2017, what museums are like. In Louvre Museum, every day is like, full of people bringing iPads and, iPhone to take pictures. I brought my mom to Tate Modern, and when I told her one of the painting, this is like a record-breaking auction sales. And she, right away, used her iPad to take a picture. So all in all, it's a time of reality check. We have a few really amazing speakers today, including Simon BRAULT, the Director and CEO of Canada Council for the Arts. We have Wai-ching, Associate Professor of the Academy of Visual Arts of Baptist University, and also Andy STRATFORD, the Managing Director of FutureEverything. So I would like to welcome Simon to go on the stage to deliver the first speech. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much again to the Hong Kong Arts Development Council for including us in this discussion for the second year. I just want to present very briefly our point of view on where we are in Canada in terms of thinking about the future of digital and why we should pay attention to it. But before that, I just wanted to share an image that was part of our last annual report, our corporate report, and it's a still from a film made by Kyoka Sakamoto. And that film is describing her personal journey. It's a very poignant film to find her sister in Japan. And it's a way to illustrate that there are many, many connections between Canadian artists that we support at Canada Council and this part of the world. And it's clear that there's an appetite for more connections internationally. Canada is a very vast country. I'm always struck when I come to a place like Hong Kong where everybody is, there's a constant quest for space. And in our country, there's a constant quest to occupy the space because it's impossible. I mean, we have a vast country and with a very, very small population. So for us, the question of connecting with the rest of the world is a question of sustainability at every level, but including for the arts. When I was here last year, I mentioned many different initiatives connecting Canada with Asia, the Asia-Pacific region. I won't go back into those examples. What I want to say is that We are absolutely committed right now in Canada to, again, play a bigger role on the international stage. It's clear that when the new Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, was elected, one of his first statements was that Canada would be back on the world stage again after 10 years of being really under the radar with the previous government. It means that for the Canada Council, one of the decisions we made when we had the confirmation of the progressive doubling of our budget over 5 years was that we would double the investment we are making to make sure that Canadian artists would be more present on the world stage by supporting touring activities, by supporting travels of our artists, international co-productions, etc., etc. What we want to address today is really, what we want to tackle today is really the question of arts and digital. Last spring, we organized in Montreal a huge summit to bring together the arts world and the digital world to accelerate and build momentum for a conversation that we want to foster through a special digital fund. We realize, and yes, you know, you can find in Canada artists who are at the forefront of digital creation. They are artists who are exploring territories with technologies that are absolutely striking. It blows your mind. At the same time, when we look at the bulk of the arts sector in our country, the portion of the cultural activity that we do support at Canada Council, we must admit that the sector is seriously lagging behind. So we did a kind of a large study in Canada, a survey, to find out where is the average theater, dance, ballet, orchestra in our country in terms of their capacity to adapt and to cope with and to really use digital to scale up their work. And we realized that it's very, very minimal. In fact, we also did a research to find out exactly what were the strategies adopted all over the world in order to advance this creative economy or the digital economy, to find out that in many of the countries, the strategy did not include seriously the artists and did not include seriously the traditional art form. So we realized that we have this contradiction where our government really entrusted us with the doubling of the budget. We are we start to make a serious reinvestment in the arts, but if we don't do something to help the sector to transition to the digital era, we may be in a situation where a lot of the things will happen in this digital post-industrial world, and the art sector will remain more or less with the same business model and the same habits and the same approaches that are pre-digital, and that will hurt him and marginalize him more and more. So we decided to create a fund. It's a transition fund of $80.5 million, Canadian dollars, over 5 years, to really solicitate from the arts sector proposals that would help them to really take advantage of digital. And there are kind of 3 components to that fund. One is around digital literacy. One is around public engagement, so all the different ways that through digital you can augment the public and the engagement of the public with the arts. And the third part, which is the most challenging one, is around the new ways of working that are more adapted to digital. Because the way we organize and we encourage the arts sector in a country like Canada was truly through a constant quest for excellence, but also a system of competition, a system of granularity, a system of silos, a systems where, you know, the people in theater always fight to have more money than the people in music, who want more money than the people in visual arts. And we feel that the future is really around collaboration and cooperation. And that the argument of that digital fund is that you should present projects that won't give you a specific edge as a company, but that will benefit to the sector or to the subsector that you are part of. We just had the first applications. It's too soon to know exactly where we are, but we know that we already see a different mentality, and we already see different associations and networking, people who are not the usual suspects for the Canada Council, working with traditional artist organizations. We see the question of digital as a question of sustainability of the art sector. We also believe profoundly that digital needs more art than art needs digital. So we really believe that we need to redefine, and we need to redefine a kind of a humanistic approach that will fit the digital era to make sure that we won't lose control and that human beings won't be excluded of a model of civilization that is now emerging worldwide. So, and you can see if you go on the website, we wrote a manifesto for the arts at the era of digital, trying to explain that, as a very famous writer, philosopher, French one, Éric Sadin, said, disruption is less an intention and more a consequence. So we're facing, we are in this discussion right now with the arts sector, where the art sector used to say constantly, we are very creative, and they confuse the notion of being creative and the notion of being innovative. You can create theater every day, but you can do it more or less the same way the Greeks were working 1,000 years ago. Innovation is new models, is new ways of doing things. So we think that the question of innovation is really needed in order to make sure that creation will have the impact it should have in our society. So to kind of rephrase what I said, I like to make a parallel with a sentence by a very famous Italian poet who said that art is the proof that life is not enough. And I think our challenge for the near future is to make sure that art will be the proof that technology is not enough. So it's really kind of a reorganizing and reframing the discussion around digital. We can say that the digital era could trouble, fascinate, disturb, exclude, rally, inspires, impoverishes, disappoints, or galvanize us. It accepts all of us. It affects all of us. It affects every nation in the world. And the big question is to take advantage of digital to redefine the relationship between arts and society. I was listening to the president panel, and I do agree that all those arguments about what the arts could do are real. We need to repeat them. But I profoundly believe that it's time to change that conversation. I think that digital is pushing our society in a zone where, if we don't come back with a very strong proposal of the role of the arts in society, again, we will expel ourselves of the civilization we are trying to build and to control. So that is my message today, and I look forward for the discussion with the panel. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. So my name is Bryan that was introduced, and I'm very happy to be invited here to deliver the speech. And the topics I would like to name for the presentation is We Can Do Magic. And for me, as a young kid, I once thought of whether I can be a magician. And at that moment, I remember there's a very famous magician called David Copperfield. And then he was extremely handsome. And then I dropped the idea because I'm not as handsome as him. And I ended up to be a media artist. And at some point of time, I also dreamed to be a clown, the second to a magician. And I also look into my size, that I am weight challenged in the opposite direction, that I can fit into any outfit of the clown that they normally wear. And so that's why I become a teacher. And teacher and clowns actually similar. And media artists and magicians, actually they are doing the same things that I would like to elaborate in the next couple of slides. And I was also inspired by the talk that Isaac just made to us, that for media artists or media art, a lot of the audience that was expecting a teenager to give you the talk. So they're expecting the next CEO who have the kickstart venture capital to invest in his or her company will be something in the range of 17 or 22. And for me, as the student often quotes at that particular age category, we are classified as something we call in Chinese as old seafood. And to translate into English is something like Asian bottom, that the bottom is some part of your body. And so until I discovered Isaac, he's the youngest one in this room, then I was actually a little bit uncomfortable, because in the very beginning, we talk about generation X, Y, Z, and as far as I notice around in the audience, it's quite difficult to find someone in the generation Z or something, especially in a venue that's supposed to be a university and was supposed to have a school of design just next by this venue. Okay, so go back to myself. I'm going to show you a number of films that I prepared, and because of the film, they are fictional. And because they are fictional, I can just cite or talk whatever I want to. And because a lot of them actually come from the creator who already deceased. So in that case, I can cite whatever I would like to do. And for me, I come from a computer background. So I start working with computer. I start teaching at School of Creative Media and the Baptist U Visual Art. I also study design and fine arts after my bachelor degrees in computer science. Those are the subjects I'm responsible for. So for me, actually, I don't have the burden to represent a huge institution. I just talk about myself as a media artist and teacher. And I also work on commercial projects, including something like the Shanghai Expo or those kind of things. And I'm also a developer. And as a software developer, I also engage my performance skill to demonstrate in front of my camera to show us what I can do with my software. And I publish books. So the first film I would like to show is this one, which is just a trailer. And then so I try to have the sound coming out. Is it okay to have this volume or the sound from the... what is it? So the first film is actually called The Prestige. This is the film from Christopher Nolan. It's talk about two magicians. And in the trailer, actually, you can see that when they need to deliver the magic, they need to have a very strong supporting team of technicians and technical support people and engineers and sometimes scientists. And closer to the end of the trailer, you will discover one person who is played by David Bowie. And anyone who has seen the film remember the name of that particular character.
I need to know how he does it. He has no trick. It's real. Every great magic trick consists of 3 acts. The first act is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, but of course, it probably isn't. The second act is called The Turn.
He's obsessed with discovering your method.
The magician makes this ordinary something do something extraordinary. Now,
so in this particular scene, actually, you will see David Bowie coming out from somewhere. So he's playing a character called Nicholas Tesla. And for those who drive, actually, you know this is the brand of the car that you're using electricity as the power supply at this moment. So Tesla is actually an engineer, and sometimes is described as a crazy scientist in this particular film, who support actually the gadget that the magician need to use in his performance. And the other film I would like to show is actually very, very old. It's date back to much older than what Isaac showed you in a few minutes before. It's by a director, but there's also a name that you need to pay attention. He's the producer. And the name of the producer is Thomas Edison. So anyone who remember who this one is. So when I was a kid studying primary school, actually we really learned the idea about that Edison is the one who created the light bulb for those electricity. And so that's why in this particular situation, his company is actually producing this supposed to be the first motion or stop motion animation. So I don't have enough time, I will stop here and move to the next one. And so it's the first demonstration of what we call a magical play in this way, but that one is not a live one. And then after 100 years, close to 2011, and there's actually a real magician called Marco Tempest, and which appear on TV pretty often. I'm not sure whether anyone come across him. And he delivered his magical performance in one of the tech talk in this recording.
Terribly sorry, I forgot the floor. Wake up. Hey. Come on. Please. Come on. Ah, sorry about that. Forgot this. There you go. Give it another try. Okay. Figured out the system. No. Uh-oh. try this. Come on.
Okay, so we have seen the trick of this magician, and behind this magician, Michael Tempest, actually there's also a person, and that gentleman is actually a frequent visitor to Hong Kong. So actually a few months ago in the Microwave International Media Art Festival, he was invited to show some of his work. And in May this year, he's also invited by one of the group called Maker Bay in Hong Kong to deliver some talks about his contribution to an institute that's with the name called something like School of Computational Poetics or School of Poetic Computation. So this is some kind of involvement or some direction, so we can also understand beside like the corporate sponsorship from Edison, from Tesla. So there's actually another community, and that community is built by this group of people like Lieberman. So he's one of the founder of the group called Open Framework. So Open Framework is actually an open source software community developed by artists and designers, which they have the community to contribute each contribution back to the online social media, and then the others can actually use the software for free in their creation. So the Open Framework processing and the others kind of open source software community also built up a huge supporting foundation for artists and designers in this particular situation. And if you want to, but probably will not have time to show this one, then Lieberman actually was in Hong Kong since 2008. It's actually commissioned by a shopping mall, and that shopping mall is the Elements in Hong Kong that is kind of showcase his voice responding software. And
creative process.
So the film or clips you have seen, actually, if you imagine in that particular situation nowadays, they belong to something we call augmented reality, actually. So the augmented reality, virtual reality are those areas that believed to have a lot of fun, a lot of sponsorship, a lot of other contribution from the commercial sponsor or from the community. So actually the idea of augmented reality, you take the videos, clips as some source of reference, they can date back to Edison or Tesla or something in magic. So magic is some kind of augmented reality, I should say, that in this case, which kind of combining both my real present and something that projected through the screen, and as a way to deliver our performance and presentation. So this is the things I prepare for the talk. So for other questions, so I'm happy to answer, to address, and to discuss among different speakers from this section. Okay, thank you.
Technology again. So thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me here to Hong Kong. I'm Andy STRATFORD, Managing Director of FutureEverything, a cultural agency that has delivered the UK's Digital Arts Festival since 1995 and works across the arts and technology sectors in Asia and Europe. The UK has built an international leadership role in the creative economy, and I'm here to share with you the next wave of innovation. I'm going to talk about a novel way the arts can generate value and have an impact in other industries. And I'm going to show how this can lead to revenue for the arts and to outstanding culture. How do we do this? By evidencing how the arts can demonstrate value in and for other sectors, specifically technology and city innovation. To illustrate this point, I will introduce some problems facing the data and technology industry. I will then show how the arts might solve that problem, the value this generates, and how we can measure and demonstrate this value. But first, let me tell you a bit about my background. Before I joined FutureEverything, I was Managing Director of Walk the Plank, an organisation that focused on co-creation and participatory engagement for large-scale celebratory events in both the UK and Europe, many of which were associated with the Capitals of Culture programme. This show in Finland was performed in rather challenging conditions, minus 23 degrees centigrade on the night of the show, which took place on a frozen river. Just as well that I like the cold, my main passion outside the arts is mountaineering. This is FutureEverything. Many of the cultural programmes we have delivered have addressed the social impacts and consequences of the digital revolution. The case study I will briefly present has been developed in the context of large-scale cultural and technology programmes in Europe and in Asia. One of these was the Singapore Smart Nation programme, where we were commissioned by the Singapore government to deliver a digital culture component of the Singapore 50th anniversary celebrations. We supported the government to include art and culture in this flagship technology development programme. Another project is CityVerve, the UK's Internet of Things, or IoT, you're going to hear a bit more about IoT, smart city demonstrator, where we made a case for art and culture to be included as a project theme. And in the European IoT large-scale pilots, we are supporting the combination of art and IoT to stimulate innovation and raise awareness of key issues around big data, around privacy, and around accountability. So in order to explain how art can inspire technology and the value it generates, let me introduce one of the problems the technology industry faces that the arts could uniquely solve. This is the central concern and the main barrier to market development in industries such as the IoT. And it's the biggest roadblock to citizen uptake of new technology: trust. Trust is the currency in user-driven technology. Without trust, there is only one outcome, and that is market failure. The reason trust is such a vital issue is illustrated by this quote, and just take a moment to read that. And check out the date, 1993. Mark Weiser's vision was that the computing would just disappear into the world around us. It would not look like a computer with a screen and a keyboard. A computing device would look like a cup or a switch, or not be seen at all. And today, slightly scarily, this vision is now being realized with the Internet of Things, or the IoT. Today, computing and data systems are increasingly pervasive in the built environment. As we move through the city, our interactions with our phones, with city infrastructures, the operation of systems we use or depend on, from transport to energy, are constantly creating data, so that data just flows through the urban environment. This image illustrates not only that technologies are hidden from view, but also their complexity. The metaphor here is that using an IoT service and trying to work out where the data has originated from is like standing at the mouth of the Amazon River and trying to determine which of the countless tributaries an individual drop of water has originated from. This makes it incredibly difficult to attribute accountability if something goes wrong. So how can art help address this challenge? One way might be transparency. I'm going to present an artwork we developed as part of the UK's IoT Smart City demonstrator, CityVerve. This is Everything Every Time by Naho Matsuda. The artwork consisted of moving displays installed across the city of Manchester. The displays presented seemingly random lines of poetry about incidental happenings in the city, but were in fact generated from data recording events in the city. The CityVerve artwork was conceived as the first implementation of an important technology innovation, the CityVerve API, or Application Protocol Interface, a single access point to all data in the city. In the end, it turned out that the pace of artistic innovation moved faster than the pace of technology innovation. The artists were ready, but the technology was not. The CityVerve API was not ready to go. But the artists were very, very capable technologists themselves, and they built their own data platform and their own API for the artwork. The artwork consisted of these beautiful flip dot displays. These were reclaimed from buses and repurposed and created the aesthetic of the screens installed through the city to display the poetry. The artists also curated and selected their own data sets, looking for interesting data that revealed a surprising perspective on a city that you do not ordinarily see. They also inserted some more playful data based on sound inferences, but the artist's own interpretation, with the idea of posing questions to the audience about whether the information was true or related to them. The artist's interest was to lead people to question the city systems they may otherwise take for granted or not even see. Here you see Naho Matsuda, the lead artist with two of the Fault Lines artists. In the quotes are some of Naho Matsuda's motivations for developing the work. And in this next short clip, we can hear her explain in her own words.
People would see it and think, oh, maybe it's something the city put up. And then they started to read the little text, and then they looked at it again. And I think that made people question, is it true or is it not true? Where does the information come from? Maybe it's about us. Maybe we feed into a big data stream.
And to understand the impact of this work, our researchers spoke to partners and the audience. The technology partner was Cisco Systems, and the lead technologist on the project adopted the artist's language and interest in leading people to ask questions about the systems. We also spoke to technology industry people who experienced the work. They reported the work introduced them to new ways of representing data, and also that they would be more likely to use the data service commercially, having seen the work. So back against the title, Art to Inspire Technology and Value Creation. Recently, our focus at FutureEverything has shifted to demonstrating the value and impact of our artistic collaborations for non-arts partners, and also developing tools and methods that others can adopt. And this is in the context of science, technology, and the arts, or as we now call it in Europe, STARTS. The outcome of our artistic practice and research is the Open Prototyping Framework, a process model developed specifically for arts-science collaborations. This involves 6 phases. In the scoping phase, artistic research and critical thinking introduce novel framings of concepts, challenges, or capabilities. And in the connect phase, open prototyping builds connections, ownership, and trust between partners, teams, and among citizens and service users. And during play, the unique skills of artists can explore limits of technologies, ideas, materials, and applications. In the producing of work, novel interfaces and open infrastructures can add imaginative dimensions to the smart city. And when work is displayed, art makes visible and legible systems that are hidden or complex and enables a wide audience to experience future scenarios. Interpretation of the work can build transparency, judgment, agency, and trust in the way people interact with data systems. This is a visual representation, again, of the 6-stage process. It has been developed more as a tool for intermediary organizations to design, to deliver, and to evaluate art or STARTS collaborations, and provides a scalable framework or process to which an artist or technology organization or facilitator can refer. I say scalable as an artist may only use the center circle, stages 2 to 5, or a piece of work may be produced often in a more R&D context, so using scope, play, and connect. So through research, we have analysed the outcomes to determine the attributes of each stage and the value which they have to artists, and the value that they have to technology partners. And I'm sorry I've not got more time to explore this fully in this very short presentation. So art to inspire technology, and how we can think about art and value creation. To summarise, 2 key contributions which support the idea that art has a meaningful role in value creation in a technology innovation context. Combining art and ICT can stimulate innovation in city data systems, and literacy and agency underpin trust and acceptance. I look forward to discussing these ideas further. Thank you.
Thanks to our speakers for the really insightful speeches. This is quite challenging for us to summarize this panel because like our three speakers are focusing on entirely different things about technology. Let me just try to summarize a little bit. I'm attempting to. Andy talks about how technology could really enable citizens to participate and bring good to society. Simon talked about the structural changes of society, which actually deals with funding, management system, how we interact, and also about ultimately about behavior and also our mindset changes. Bryan invited us to actually relook at history, which is a very intellectual discussion about media archaeology, which in a sense that a lot of academics in new media art are doing. And he talks about the notion of illusion and also ultimately talk about interfaces, network, and perceptions and values. I just want to throw some keywords here so that we can actually start our discussion. Globalization, internationalization, and local. Funding, management strategies. Collaboration, particularly within non-art sectors. API, which is application program interface, and which leads to the notion of data. And humanistic approach of technology, which leads to the idea of values. And education, impact. Ultimately, we talk about disruptions, which I think that's the kind of really major word, that key word that we are all concerned about. Let me just start to ask the first question, which I think let's talk about money first. Because this is a panel hosted by the ADC. Okay, so the first question is what is actually the landscape of our funding system in this kind of really radically changing environment? For FutureEverything, I know that you guys, most of the fundings from Creative Europe, and you guys are dealing with Brexit. So how are you guys going to get funding later? And then you guys also have another project called Fault Lines, which actually dramatically thinking about art organization, not only presenting programs, but actually commissioning new generation of artists or non-artists to produce new works and bring goods to society. What the Canada Council for the Arts, you guys are very innovative. I actually read through the whole manifesto of the Digital Art Initiative. You guys have a lot of really great words, which is about collaboration, networking, relevancy, impact, which ultimately talk about organizational structure and leadership style, which not only about the program, ultimate program, what it looks like, but also about how art organizations are managing their own institution. They are specifically funding or encouraging art organizations to disrupt themselves, which is very important. As Bryan, I'm sure you have a lot of experiences in getting funding from ADC or from the commercial sectors. I think that as a curator or as artists, we are really dealing with really different funding system or landscape. So I would like to get some insights from you guys about money first. Maybe start with you. Yeah.
Well, as you can probably imagine, I'm not going to toe the party line here. Brexit is a bit of a disaster, to say the very least. But I think we're, in any case, I think we've been looking at alternative partners now for a number of years. And I think the idea that you can only rely on an arts council and that you can only rely on project funding, you can only rely on R&D funding just for pure research, which does also work in the arts. And then you've got corporate social responsibility. So all those things have been there for a long time, and we wanted to try something different. And so the idea that you can actually, that artists are the best innovators, and if you can take that to the technology companies in the right context, then I think we can find some very interesting new avenues for potentially no strings attached arts funding. It's a difficult line to tread, and it is a fault line, which is why our programme is called Fault Lines. And it's something we've been exploring for the last year, and the programme has another 15 months to run. This piece of work, Every Time, was made as part of the Fault Lines programme.
No string attached funding. That's the key word. We have to use that. Simon?
But I guess the question of the never-ending discussion on money and the arts, I think that where we are now in Canada, because we are in this situation as an arts council, that the investment by the government, never happened before in 60 years. It's radical, it's major, and it means that we won't have any excuse if we don't succeed to do something else at the end of it. Because not having money is not the excuse. So I guess the question now is really, where do you put the money? Where a public investment will have the best, the most leverage impact? And it's fascinating to realize that for a lot of politicians and a lot of people running private foundations, they have this notion or this idea that digital gives the possibility of doing fabulous things instantly. And it's not true. It's not true because digital changed the way we distribute, the way we produce magic, the way but the time needed to create something significant, the time needed to develop a scenario, the time needed to write the right novel or the poem and all of that is not very different. It's the same amount of time, more or less, than it was hundreds of years ago. So this question of what kind of time do we buy? Because we are, I think, in the business of an arts funder, we are in the business of buying time, a meaningful time for artists to master and develop and come to a point where, their work will be significant and worth of being distributed through digital, especially in a world where most of what is presented towards all the channel is crap. It's not good. So the question of why do we invest, how do we do that? And it means a lot of changes. For us, it meant that we went from 146 program to 6 program at Council. We went with the idea that in the future, we don't want to spend 80% of our money in core fund to fund core funded institutions. We need more money for projects. Like all our digital fund is only project driven. Anyone, any artist, any organization can apply to that fund, but it has to be a project, and it has to have a beginning and an end, which is not the case by definition of core funding. So we realize that if we want to be able to really sustain the arts in a digital environment, we need to take care as public funder of components of the system that nobody is interested to taking care of. And because now there's a complete disconnection between the retribution of the artists and the production and distribution system that digital is producing, it's becoming absolutely essential that it is done. And that's why it's with great dismay that I'm observing a lot of strategy for digital strategy all over the world that don't take as an essential consideration the question of remuneration of the artists.
Just a quick question. I think Tesa's panel talked about impact and measurements. Do you guys set new metrics for this initiative?
Yeah, the way we decided and we pay a lot of attention right now to measurement, but one very fundamental and very radical decision we took was that we, as a public funder, we would do the measurement. We would not put the burden on the artist or the artistic organization, because where it happened elsewhere in other jurisdictions, what we saw is that the artist or the artistic organization kind of tailored their project in order to tick the boxes of measurement. And I think it's the road for mediocrity. So what we did is we kind of reconstruct, when we took all the programs and went to 6 programs, we built logic model, being very clear of what are the expected outcomes, long-term, mid-term, short-term, and a few key indicators that are quantitative and qualitative. And right now we are developing capacities and research at Canada Council in order to be able to track that. So there are ways to do that. You know, you ask for final reports. We are not there yet, but what we want eventually is that take all the final reports of the thousands of artists and organizations that we support, capture words, I'm really doing a lot of data, work with the data in order to produce not only an interesting narrative, but also evidence that it worked or it did not work. And so for us, it's an obsession, but it's not an obsession that we want to transfer to the artist or to the artistic organization, because it will format their work, and that the last thing we want to do in the future is to have a funding model that is prescriptive. And I think that in the past, our funding models were very prescriptive. We were expecting da-da-da-da-da, and people were trying to produce that. I think we need to change that approach.
How do you encourage collaboration? Do you accept like proposals that is jointly applied?
It's simple, because with the digital fund, it's part of the criteria to assess a project is what is the level of cooperation, collaboration, how open is your project, how shareable and scalable is your project. So it is part of the DNA, if you want. So if you come alone and you say, okay, I want to do something to sell more my products in my museum, we will say no, not because it's not interesting, but again, because it's not transformative for the sector. It's not transformative beyond your own organization. It's too self-serving, it's too narrow. So you can apply elsewhere, but this is not what we'll support. So we're very clear on not on on what we want to see, but we are clear on what type of approach we would like to see, to support.
Bryan?
So another joke is that when I talk to my hairstylist, there's actually for middle-aged men, there are 2 things that will never be enough. One is money, the other is hair. And so for media artists, actually similar things is the money, especially in Hong Kong. So I actually quite familiar with auto practitioner in Hong Kong for a couple of years, and I noticed a lot of the prominent or active media artists in Hong Kong, actually they come from 2 sectors. So one is design. So they own the design company. They're working as designer or interactive designer. And the others are educators, similar to myself. And in that situation, actually, it's not possible and quite impossible for them to survive as pure something called media artists without doing something else to fund the projects. So for me, actually, a lot of those research development things that come from university, and also I receive the paycheck from my boss every month. And the other comment is about the idea of digital and analog or older technologies. I remember I saw a documentary, something like the making of some of the Chemical Brothers music video. And then the director, actually, they claim they are doing experimental filmmaking. So they're doing LED light with the shaking, with the light and some liquid pouring on top of the speaker with jumping out. And it's extremely low tech in a sense. And the reason they claim that if they would like to do computer animation with such kind of thing, they need to cost them maybe 3 to 5 times the cost in order to produce the animation. So it's a little bit contrary to our understanding. So in the very beginning, we thought that digital technology actually enhance productivities, and then we just out of a second that can be done. But at the same time, if we take into the the human resources that you need to find someone else to do the animation or effect. So it's better for you to use the very low-tech way of doing that kind of experimental filmmaking. And the other is my personal experience. I also owned a startup company a few years ago that we experienced the advertising budgets actually for something like augmented reality works. So in the very beginning, we have budgets something like 300 to 400,000 Hong Kong dollar. And then we witnessed the annual decrease of that kind of budgets. So up to now, my students actually, when they are pitching for augmented reality jobs, they are looking for something like 1/10 of the budget we had before. And when they're kind of pitching like that one, the agency will come back to them and they claim. So it's much cheaper to hire a few part-time worker, so usually female part-time worker, to put a booth and then take a photo with upload immediately to Facebook, rather than ask you to commission to work on a new media art or interactive project. So this something like a scenario happening in Hong Kong. We kind of witnessed this kind of decline in client spending as well as in the production costs.
Since we are being recorded right now, and all the ADC directors are here, as an artist, could you give us some quick tips about, as a media artist, it takes a lot of money and time to do R&D, right? And what would actually, would the council change the funding system in order to benefit media artists like you?
And so I have a few success cases and I have a lot of failure cases in that case. I think one of the key things is the deliverable that in research and development actually do not have a lot of concrete deliverable. So this one kind of thing that will not easy to measure with the KPI like the number of visitors and number of impressions on the website. And so this is one thing where we can see whether what kind of measurement that we can develop for this form of measurement. And the other is the infrastructure support that I also mentioned in my talk is, so we do not may not rely solely on corporate or government funding. So there's a lot of cases like what I mentioned, like the Maker Bay and those kind of organizations. They actually build a grassroots or bottom-up support to artists and practitioners. And the area I work on is actually quite a lot of the open source software developer. They are willing to moonlighting their work and then upload to the internet and distribute for free. And so for myself, actually, because I was supported by my boss in this case, I also kind of fit back into this particular system. So most of the work I work on, I release, I put it back into the open source community that others actually they can benefit. So it's kind of ecology gradually building up because of it's global in a sense that it's not only limited to Hong Kong or Asia, but it's a lot of contribution from UK or Canadian countries and or from the States. So there's also one thing that the community, that the type of project that probably the public funder, they can also so kind of providing some sort of initiative for such kind of organization to survive and to live on.
Great.
I mean, I think it would be really great for organisations like the Arts Council in the UK and maybe Hong Kong Arts Development Council to take a very proactive role in brokerage with organisations that are not just doing art support on a CSR basis, but are actually some of the other companies who are looking to who could perhaps benefit from artists working with them, because artists have so much to offer, And I think the network of people among the council that I've met this week are just incredible, with some incredible connections. And I think helping brokerage some of those connections would be an amazing thing to happen.
Before we open up to audience question, after talking about money, I would like to talk about values. And I think one thing which is common among three of you guys is like, technology is not just something like a fancy spectacle, but it's like you guys are talking about a lot about human, actually, the humanistic approach. And one word that actually really caught my attention is the word trust. Which I think this is also like a really major word in the 21st century. On the one hand, I think Dr. Wong was talking about like we are going to be threatened by AI, right? But on the other hand, I think on the one hand, we actually use dating apps and meet strangers, and then fall in love. On the other hand, we are actually like have fake news and all these kind of things, right? So what do you guys think about like the core values, or like how do you kind of like represent or that kind of manifest the idea of trust in your program?
It's a very good question, and in fact I realized some months ago, maybe 3 months before we would have that big summit on arts and digital and it was a very special summit because we invited people from all across Canada, artists, completely diverse, with people from indigenous ascent and all of that. But what I realized is that the more we were approaching that summit, the more I realized that, wow, we kind of needed to be clear on what are the values, what is our framework. Because there were fears within the community that all of that would be commercializing or instrumentalizing the arts, or moving from a position of valuing the arts to valuing cultural export. And so there was a lot of confusion. And even for us, we realized that our legal mandate that has been developed 65 years ago was not really debating those questions. It was really, when the Arts Council was created, it was after the Second World War, and it was really around the question of enlightening, the question of making sure that people would enjoy the arts, that education would become important. So all those ideas that were very important are still important, but they were not clear enough or precise enough or contextualized enough for us to be able to have that discussion. So I started to work, I have piles of books at home, and I started to work on that manifesto just to say this is where we are, and I was not saying that this is the end of the world, but I needed to say at the very beginning of that summit, this is where, as the CEO of the Canada Council, this is where I stand from a value point of view, and open then the discussion. And it has been very interesting because I realized while working on it that those questions are fundamental. Because why would you give money to so-and-so if it's not only for art's sake? If it's not, so why would you do that? What do you try to protect? What do you try to enhance? What do you try to advance? And while doing that, I realized that digital could give us the opportunity to redefine and for a refoundation of our discourse about the importance of arts in society. And I think that it is as fundamental as that. And personally, this is where I am right now. I think that we need new arguments, we need a new way, and we need also new people in the conversation. And we need to be able to talk with youth where there's an incredible deficit attention developed by, nobody wants to hear long arguments, but they want to have things that are relevant. And so I think it's time for us in the arts sector, and that's probably the topic of another long panel or session, but the question of, can we come with a new a refreshed approach to explain the role of the arts in our society. Why is it that we need it more than ever before? Is the question we need to answer. And I think, again, as I said, that the discourse I hear most of the time is 50 years old. You know, it has been, you know, we have examples that are more recent, but most of the arguments are 50 years old. And I think we need to make a leap and go somewhere else, and it should be grounded in this, on this question of what is the place of the human being, especially with the artificial intelligence. What is the place of the human in all that configuration?
Andy?
Well, maybe it should be the Internet of Humans, not the Internet of Things. I mean, as Simon said, art is the proof that technology is not enough. You know, we have to trust. You talked about trust. I mean, trust is a chameleon concept. It means so many different things to different people, and it shifts and changes its shape and its colour depending upon where you are sat at any particular moment. So even defining what trust is and what it means can be extremely difficult. And that's something that I think there's going to be a lot of grappling with over the next few years. There was a very interesting study which which was one of the reasons those slides came up, which was that on an intercontinental basis, there was a study done right across the regions of the world on whether people believed that their data was safe. And in actual fact, I think the figure was 53% in this region of Asia thought it wasn't, and in Europe, 65% thought it wasn't. But nowhere in the world everywhere in the world, more than 50% of people believe their data was not secure. So that is a fundamental problem and something that I think needs addressing by the technology companies. But I think that that's a technological problem, but it also becomes a societal problem.
Bryan?
So I guess it's quite difficult to leave it to Google or whoever to protect our privacy or the data. And I think in computer science, we usually describe computer as a black box. And so as a black box, that means you do not understand what's happening inside. So you can only see the input and the output, and you try to make sense what's happening inside that particular box. And this type of model actually become bigger and bigger. So with AI and algorithms, and we actually do not know what's happening inside the calculation and computations. And as long as there's something coming out, and we are not too upset by that one. So usually we'll just leave it there and without asking. I think it's the transparency of that culture of the algorithm that they are computing our life actually. And also especially in AI, they are judging human beings. So I read article that there are actually AI algorithms that will try to classify our political view, that you are a little bit too radical. That's just because of your face. We're similar to someone who are a little bit radical, and we are a little bit liberal or conservative by this kind of classification of human being by just using the appearance and some AI knowledge of technologies. So for me, as media artist, I try to approach in two different ways. The first type of project I work on is the employment of technology for some particular idea or concept, and that one will not touch too much on the ideology or political assumption about the technologies. And the other type will just work on with the technology itself. We try to question or ask whether we have some kind of cultural assumption about using that technology, especially like the IoT and AI, that popular terms that we use, but we do not have much understanding about what's going on inside those companies. And I also see documentaries about books, and actually Google is kind to digitize a lot of books without the consent of the author and then put it online. So this is also something that I guess it may not be possible to rely on the discipline of those companies, but there's some sort of regulatory bodies that might need to enforce something that the general public is not very easy to understand at this moment.
We have 5 minutes, like a lot of. So shall we open the floor and let's grab a chance to ask our experts about an issue that is dealing with our future. Any questions? No.
Thank you. A really great discussion. I'd be interested to ask the panel, what does life look like beyond digital? The focus is on digital, which has now been around for quite some time, and I know we've referenced augmented reality and artificial intelligence and a couple of other concepts, but is there a big idea that's emerging that's way beyond digital? And Simon, is that something that the next fund might anticipate at the Canada Council?
It's a good question. Actually, when I submitted the idea of that fund to the Treasury Board with my government, I talked about a fund for transition and made the argument that we know now that it's digital, and maybe 10 years from now it will be climate change refugees in Canada. We don't exactly know, but we know for certain that the fact that public funders like the Canada Council were not equipped some years ago in order to help the sector, to support the sector to adapt to a change of civilization or a profound change of society, is the result of that is that an entire sector is lagging behind and is struggling to survive and to stay relevant. So I don't know what the future will be. Nobody knows. But for certain, the question of the self-control that we have on our life is the big question. It's fascinating. Everybody talks about those cars without drivers. And when you read a lot about it, so everybody talks about what it means, but when you read more, you realize that a lot of money goes into it, and the money that goes into it is because the companies are not interested by moving people around. They're interested by where those cars will stop, because they have all the algorithms to know that, okay, you like Starbucks coffee, you like that, and those cars will stop exactly at the hour you want to go, according to your habits, and that will generate a lot of money. So the question of what will be our capacity in the near future to make our own decision? What will be the capacity for us of living a life, having a trajectory for the future that is not completely predetermined by your past habit is the big question. The question of diversity becomes a huge question because we know that the bubble effect is so strong that even if we, in theory, have access to everything, we are more and more limited by the impact of the algorithms in terms of the offers. So those questions that are, in fact, fundamental cultural questions are, we don't know exactly what the form will be, but we know that it's progressing at a pace that is incredible, and that makes certain that human beings need to develop their critical thinking more than ever. They need more than ever to have some agency and all that, and this may be where arts and culture could contribute a lot to do that, but it will be a fight. And it's not enough now to present something that is nice, beautiful, interesting, but I think it will become a real combat, a real battle.
I absolutely agree. Arts provides that critical thinking, that critical dimension. I mean, a last thought from me, can you put an algorithm on trial? An algorithm does harm to somebody. Can it be put on trial? What is the legal status of an algorithm? So there's a lot of questions that we as artists, that we as thinkers, that we as producers, we as intermediaries can help with, and we can help both society and the technology industry address those questions.
Yeah, just a quick response about Google car. I think it's really ultimately about cultural and philosophical issues. There's a really famous academic in Israel talking about if a Google car in the future there's an accident, if you turn left, it will kill 10 people. If you turn right, you will kill yourself. Then by the time when you buy the car, you have to think about what kind of person you are. Are you the kind of person who want to kill yourself or kill 10 people if there's an accident there? So this is becoming a really important ethical question when you are making a decision to buy the product, right?
And you'll only buy it if you trust it.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. So really amazing. Thank you very much for our speakers today. Let's give them. And I'm sure this topic will be continued next year.